Greetings. Of all the topics in the accounting manual which are that I have to deal with in these presentations, investments are the most scary to me. It is very complicated and has lots of rules, but let's go ahead and tackle it. It can't scare me. I've got 5 daughters, and so let's go ahead and look at what we can get from here. A lot of this presentation comes from careful reading of the accounting manual, but also from lots of discussions with the folks over in the auditing department to make sure that I understand it correctly. And so let's go through the investment chapter. Remember, we're not looking at everything about investments, just the financial reporting requirements. Okay. It starts off with a very nice statement. Most organizations have resources they do not need immediately, but which they want to have available as soon as needed and hold in a producing investment income, the hold for producing investment income. These resources are invested in a variety of financial instruments, including medium and long-term time deposits, debt securities issued by financial institutions, or debt securities issued by corporations, or debt securities by government, equity securities issued by corporations, and mutual funds that have both debt and equity securities. And they're referring to all of these sorts of things as investments. And so some people in some places in the world may like to call them securities, but at least from the perspective of the accounting manual, investments. And if it looks like a cash account, but it is not a cash equivalent, then it's saying here, then it is investments. Okay, so planned fund cash, as we saw in the previous video, planned fund cash is not a cash equivalent. It is an investment. Also, as we saw in the cash chapter, you could designate, the board can designate certain cash accounts as being non-cash equivalents. If they're not cash equivalents, then they are investments under the heading of investments. Okay, we could go down here and read. The first thing we have to decide is whether the investments are current or non-current. Okay, some investments are non-current by their nature, and that they mature after 12 months, for example, but other types of investments are either current or non-current, determining on specific criteria. Okay, GAAP defines current assets as cash and other assets which are reasonably expected to be realized in cash or sold or consumed during the normal operating cycle of the entity. Normally this is 1 year. Thus, current assets include investments which mature in 12 months or less and are available for current operations. Okay? So, if investments are available to be used for needed operating purposes, regardless of their maturity date, they should be classified as current assets. This almost seems like double talk, okay, but it is not. The definition of a current asset is an asset which will be converted to cash within the normal operating cycle of the entity. Okay, so if an investment is available for paying off current liabilities which are part of the operating cycle, these are operating liabilities, if they're available for operating purposes, they're classified as a current asset. Okay, if they're available. All right, so if this cash account, the maturity of a bond or something may be greater than 12 months, but if you could sell the bond and pay off use it for operations, paying off current liabilities, then it is a current asset. Okay, so that kicks lots of investments into current assets. So if a stock can be sold right away to pay off current liabilities and for operations, it's a current asset. If a bond, maybe a 30-year bond, but it can be sold, there's a market for it, then it is a current asset. Okay, so if you have a CD that is not a cash equivalent, and it may be a 3-year CD, but if it could be closed out and cash gotten, then it is a current asset. So it's a little bit confusing. So the 12-month rule, or normally 1 fiscal year, is not as strong as you usually think. If it is available for operating cycle of the entity, if it's available to pay off long-term debt, and the money can be gotten to by selling it, then it is a current asset. Contrary-wise, in this double talk, it could be something that you can get your money hands on right away, but is not destined for operations, then it is non-current, no matter how easy you can get your hands on it. So if you've got cash, you could walk right down to that bank account and write checks against it right away, but its purpose of that account is for not for operations, then it is non-current. Okay, so all plant fund investments are non-current. Cash for the plant fund is an investment. Since it's not available for operations, then it is non-current. Pretty weird, huh? Okay, so if investments are available to be used, this would include from current assets any investments which are committee allocated or donor restricted for future planned acquisition, liquidation, or non-current debt or any other non-operating purpose, even if they mature in 12 months or less. So the 12-month concept is not a very strong part of determining whether it's a current asset or not. If you can get your hands on it and it's available for current operations, no matter when it matures, then it is a current asset. If it is restricted for future planned acquisition or paying off of debt, then it is non-current no matter how easy you can get your hands on it. Okay, now so that is the current non-current discussion, and in the accounting manual, and I think it's a good practice, there's 3 sections of the statement of financial position asset section. There's current assets, land, building, equipment, and other assets. So there's not a section called non-current assets. There are 3 sections called current assets, land, building, equipment, and other assets. All right, land, building, equipment, and other assets being non-current, but they're not necessarily segmented out. 3 categories: current, land, building, equipment, and other assets. And so cash and cash equivalents and other current assets are under current, and buildings and equipment. So all other loans are under, all other investments are under other assets. Okay, we're skipping over investment policies, very important things, and transaction control and internal control over investments, because that's outside of the scope of these presentations. And we get down to valuation of investments. Well, this is very interesting. Okay, the accounting structure, this sentence right here, this little sentence right here has caused me many troubled thought, trying to figure out exactly what it means. The accounting structure should already have been used to separate investments by type of investment. By type of investment, we'll speak about that in a minute. We should know by fund and by current and non-current nature. This is an important concept I'm about to present. the accounting structure needs to keep every investment separate from other investments. This does not mean every investment has a different account, but somehow or another you have to keep separate investments separately. Now that will mean that is a little bit more complicated than you first think, because every purchase of an investment is a separate investment. So if I buy General Motors bonds, that is different than General Motors stock. If I buy General Motors stock in November and I buy General Motors stock in December, those are two separate investments. Okay, I'll say it again. I buy General Motors stock in January. It is separate from General Motors stock bought in February. Separate investments. And so we have to keep a listing or a tally, or our accounting system somehow or another has to keep every investment separate from every other investment. This includes the same instruments purchased at different times. Okay, they need to be able to be categorized by the type of an instrument. Okay, let me talk about what the type of instrument means. Okay, the type of instrument has to do with risk. Okay, so to quickly give it to you, bonds and stocks would be different types. But with discussions from the GCAS and from the auditor folks, they mean more than simply dividing things by bonds and stocks and mutual funds. Bonds and stocks and mutual funds are quick categories, but they would like to have more details. For example, you could have large cap stocks and small cap stocks. You could have large corporation bonds, small corporation bonds. You could have mutual funds that are mostly investing in equities, mostly investing in bonds, and so forth. They even would like to have more details than that. For example, the type of investments based on what country you're invested in. So it might be stocks from the country that you are operating in, and investments in large cap stocks in the U.S. Any concentrations of risk are different types of instruments. Okay, so this typing of the instruments is organization specific. So there's no way that we could prescribe in a listing the types of instruments, categories that you need to divide things into, because it depends on the organizational risk perspective. For example, if I am in Thailand, a risk pool would be investments in Thai corporations and investments in Thai and bonds from Thai corporations. Those are different risk pools than investments into U.S. large cap stocks or U.S. small cap stocks or emerging markets. And so there's just every possible combination of risk pools that your organization may be facing, and you need to be able to break your investments down into risk pools, whatever the risk pools are from the perspective of your organization. This needs to be done for every investment. So if you each individual investment would be the different types of investments, like General Motors bonds and General Motors stock, but General Motors stock bought on February versus General Motors stock bought in April. If you're using a stockbroker, you cannot use one account for that stockbroker. Every investment in there is a different investment. Every purchase in there is a different investment. So even though they have purchased General Motors stock 3 different times, those are 3 separate investments. I think I've made that clear. So we have to keep track of our investments by type of instrument. All right, that would have to do with risk pool. By fund, which is sort of automatically happens in the Sun Plus world when we do our bookkeeping, and we have to keep track of it whether it's current or non-current on these three categories. And then we have to do that, we do one additional classification, and as laid out here in the accounting manual. That is, you have to say whether the stock or a bond or whatever the investment is subject to accounting at fair value. We're going to go over each of these categories: held to maturity, or a loan receivable, or available for sale. Okay, so we'll just start at the top. Class 1 is subject to accounting at fair value. Now this is the default category, meaning let's just see if almost everything you have will fit in this category. That is, if you've got stocks or bonds that are actively traded, then they go in this category. Okay? If you can find their fair value, so all most of the investments that comply with policy would be subject to fair value. Okay, you are buying things that are actively traded. You're not buying stocks of a closely held company. My understanding is that would be against policy. Maybe you inherited it. Somebody left you stocks of a closely held company, so you can't sell it necessarily, so it wouldn't go under here. But if it's held for trading, and any day you might buy some more and any day you may sell it, then it goes in this category. So almost all of the investments that we think about go into here. Some investments are held to maturity. They are acquired for the express purpose of holding to maturity. Very rare in the Adventist Church. And for the entity has the financial ability to hold it for a long time. Okay? So you bought a bond or something that has a maturity date, so no stock could be fit into this category since stocks are traded and they don't have a maturity date. And so you bought a bond, you do not plan on ever selling it. All right? And then the third category, you could have, I just doubt you're going to have too many held to maturity investments in your organization. You're going to have lots of class 1 subject to fair value. The third category, you may have plenty of these. These are loans receivable. So if you have a long-term loan from another organization, that another organization owes you money, then that's an investment, and it falls into this category. Or if you have loans from your employees, they fall in this category. So you could have plenty of these types of loans. And then available for sale is a catch-all. If it doesn't fall into 1, 2, or 3, then it falls under 4, which is the organization does not have any intent or purpose. Okay, that's sort of wild. And so in practical terms, and if you've got stocks that you're just buying and selling, and you just seem like a good way to hold your money until you need it for future operations, it is a category 1. It is to be accounted for at fair value. And then most of all the investments we have in the church are either this or they are loans receivable. All right, if they are subject to accounting at fair value, then they are marked to the market value each month, and we're going to look at how that is done. If you do have this, these are held at cost and amortized cost. You just will not have many of these, and I should mention to you that Sun Plus assumes that all of your securities, like stocks and bonds, are class 1. If you have something that belongs in class 2, you are going to have to make sure it gets in your financial statements in an artificial fashion, not using automatic functionality of the SunPlus World. So the SunPlus World provides for Class 1 and Class 3. Okay, 3 loans receivable are held at cost, and then available for sale, these are also held at market value. So from a practical point of view, 1 and 4 seem to operate about the same. So this right here, this part here on valuation methods, sort of explains what I just said. So these have to be marked up, okay, to their fair value. Class 2 are held at amortized cost, which we do not provide for in the SunPlus World, which I doubt you really have many of these. Loans receivable are carried at stated at they're presented at amortized cost. Our impairment loss, basically it's at the book value as long as there's no impairment. That is, if you have an allowance for loans receivable to show any sort of impairment on the fact that they may not be collectible. So the book value, the amortized, at the cost of issuing the loan, and then as long as it's good, they're shown at that value, and if there's any doubt about it, then you set up an allowance for doubtful accounts to recognize their impairment of loss at the year you recognize it. And then available for sale, this sort of quoted here, seems complicated, but basically it is saying that it will be at the market value as well. Okay, so the SunPlus World really provides for 1 and 3, and if you feel that your investment belongs in 2 and 4, you are going to have to override what SunPlus is doing to get it to show up correctly. And talking to the auditors, the burden of proof is on the organization to show that something needs to be moved out of Class 1 into Class 2 or Class 4. And so they encouraged us to stick with providing for Class 1, and then if you want to build an argument with the auditor that it belongs in Class 2 or Class 4, good luck. Okay.